Just two conscious guys talking, where conscious male leaders come together and have a discussion that is deep, that is nourishing, that allows us to see the illumination of consciousness that's unfolding progressively for men that are waking up in the world, and where you can get insights on your own awakening as a man, and also for amazing women that want to learn more about men's challenges and struggles that have created some of the dysfunction we've seen within men in its society, often called, quote unquote, the patriarchy and other terms. What created it? What is the genesis of it all? What can we do about it today to empower men to be all that they're meant to be and to support the awakening of consciousness for men and women and all? Yeah, hey Eric, how you doing today?
Doing good, Dan. How are you, my friend?
Great. Yeah, just talking before we got on here, and how you've been in North Carolina, taking in all that beauty of nature, and we just want to keep taking in more, right? So nourishing, so amazing, right?
Yes. It is it's a beautiful landscape, and you don't get what's interesting is where I live in New Jersey, the most populated state in the United States, right? Going down into my father's property, you get those we get those moments where I'd be alone. There's 22 acres and trees, and I'd have those moments where I was alone on a property and not hear a thing except the wind through the trees. And there is a change in your reality when the only thing around you is nature, not even another human being. And it's all of a sudden, it's like you feel expansion all of a sudden, like all of a sudden, that's when you can feel truly connected beyond, because there's a lot of imaging with other people, but when you're by yourself, like all of a sudden, that's when you can start to feel your real expansion of yourself.
Yeah. Reminds me of my, the times I've been in nature and on, whether it's out in Idaho to see my not my grandfather, my father-in-law, when he used to live out there, and then, different retreats where we were more deeper in nature and things like that. Just, that sense of, this is it right here. Heaven on earth right here.
It is.
So today we're just talking about what it's like being a conscious male leader in the world, doing our thing, and maybe some of the things that and I've been interviewing guys, like we usually start off talking about those formative years, the early years, what it was like. For me, I was like a 70s child, 70s and 80s, and it's like, we all had different experiences too, I think, to some degree based on when we were born, but there's like all these ongoing male stereotypes. Like for me, I was a sensitive kid, so that's not seen as a positive for guys back then. It's like, or like, okay, although if you're a nice guy, that was pretty cool even then, but still sensitive, not so good.
Right.
There's just all these ideas that you should be a certain way, into guy things, war, cars, or whatever. And
Right.
I was into those things to some degree, but not anywhere near the way some guys are. So certainly not war.
I grew up in New York City, so people were having wars in cars.
Right. You have to imagine it. You had it right there in front of you, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, so what male stereotypes did you kind of feel were kind of on you when you were a kid, even in retrospect, that you kind of had to deal with and then sort of kind of work your way through?
Wow. Well, I mean, it's still a broad question. There's the family thing, and then there's what you focus on, whatever. I mean, I grew up as I said, New York City. I grew up in Queens, in an area called Jackson Heights, from the age of, my parents divorced when I was 2. So raised by my single mom, and her and me and my brother lived in this little one-bedroom apartment in Queens. My father went off to do, you know, business stuff and whatever. So I guess to a certain extent, I had a lot of her influence, at least as a direct parent, you know. And then my father moved away for a while, and then when I was about 6 or 7, he moved back, and so I saw him on weekends and whatever. So, but in my personal life, I'd say the most, especially in the early years, the most consistent, if you want to call it that, would have been my uncle, who, you know, I think underneath it all, he had a good heart, has a good heart. He's still alive. He was quite sarcastic, though. So I guess I grew up with that as a, you know, and I was an overweight kid, so I remember he used to do this thing called the Tasmanian flab grab, which was basically an excuse to grab my gut, shake it, like that kind of thing. He was that kind of guy, you know, and my mother, being more meek, you know, was like the big brother. She'd been raised to, you know, the big brother is the important thing, and I'm the meek little sister, and he's valuable and I'm not, which is how she ended up being a divorcee, which is a whole other story. So, I mean, as a direct influence, that, and then my father, when, you know, in my, you know, around 5, 6 years old, whenever he started showing up again, you know, he came out, you know, same generation, you know, the baby boomers. So, you know, I guess a very strong, bravado kind of energy. Worked in the trucking industry, so, you know, dealing with Teamsters and truck drivers and, you know, and all these kind of people, as well as management. You know, I guess I don't know if that had been his thing or he developed in relation to that. And others, you know, he'd been involved in boat sports and whatever. So again, you know, these sort of strong, you know, I'm right kind of things. But at the same time, and here's the interesting thing, I think, is a counterpoint. Growing up, my mother was very protective, so I didn't go out, like, you know how other kids, especially growing up in New York City, like when you grow up in suburbia, you know, they send you out in the street and like go play with your friends and go play, you know, pick up stickball or baseball or whatever and whatever. My mother was very, you know, she considered that if my brother and I were alive, everything was okay. So it was like, drop us to school, pick us up after school, take us home back to the apartment. And so my life was spent mostly on television, you know, because I didn't go seeking my mother's companionship or anything. I was like, okay, well, she's my mom. And my brother and I really didn't talk very much. We didn't get along all that well. So I would live on television, and in the old days, you know, like now you have 8 million channels. You have streaming, and you know, you could spend the rest of your life watching cartoons, all new from whatever. But back then, you know, it was like 5 cartoons in you know, the mid 1970s. So I remember I'd watch television. There'd be like maybe an hour of cartoons, and then it was like they would replay stuff from the late 60s and early 70s. So I'd be watching like Gilligan's Island and the Brady Bunch. I remember being very much part of my life, and watching the Brady Bunch and watching Robert Brady, you know, I think that was his name, right? The father on there, Robert Reed, sorry.
Yeah.
Whatever the guy, whatever
It says Joe Brady, but I'm not sure.
Something Brady, you know, Mr. Brady. But you know, I'm sure you watched the Brady Bunch, and you remember what kind of father he was. He was always there. He was always compassionate, and then looking at a normal family. I didn't have, you know, I had one sibling, you know, and eventually the half brother later on. But that's again a different story. But looking at that and wanting that kind of life, I remember that, you know, very much from my young years, looking at that and saying, you know, that seems like nirvana to me. So I guess it was kind of, and this is the kind of stuff you think about now looking back. When you're 6 years old, you're not thinking about this consciously. It's just being, input into you. But I would say that looking back, that was probably a very strong counterpoint. Was here was this guy that I dreamed about having as a father, as a male figure in my life. And then here was, the reality of it, even the brothers who all cared about each other, as opposed to my brother and I, who basically didn't speak to each other. And when we did, it was usually profanities. So, parents and siblings and everything. So I think at the end of it, or as a result of it, in a large part, it became kind of, at least at home, I wasn't all that. I didn't draw attention to myself. I didn't, you know what I mean? Like I just wanted to be left alone with the television and everything. But in school, I guess I acted out a lot. I was, a class clown and all that. And I guess that's a result of whatever, your issues are. A little bit of being the fat kid in class, and then also, not having a perfect home life, as it were. So but I would say, at least as you said, I was born in 1969, so being a 70s kid, that
year. I was born the same year then.
Yeah, there you go. So you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally. I mean, yeah. So there's so your case, you're talking, definitely specifically to, your dad and him not being there, that he had a certain energy he was in that was more the I'm a real man kind of energy, like that's a stereotype anyway, like I'm a manly energy, I'm a trucking industry, right? So and then you have like really the Brady family. I mean, he is really like more even, more soft, I would say, even, but more even, maybe of a masculine energy, maybe like how he showed up on the show.
Yeah.
So, and then he was always there. So that's very interesting. But your dad, you're like, oh, he did his work thing or whatever. Like he was like, I'm out to do my thing in the world is the message I'm getting, right? And and maybe family isn't so important now, and now it's about what I want to do and what I'm going to do.
Right.
So interesting. So how did that, so for you, it sounds like, I don't know, how did that affect you? I mean, you talked about a little bit on the edges, but like, how did that affect you? Seeing that example of like, with your dad, like, how did that impact you, and how you thought about men and how you thought about yourself as a man now that you reflect back on it?
Interesting. Okay. I'm reflecting back now to get to
So you got to think about it. Yeah.
Okay. How did I see myself as a man? Was that what the question was, or
How did that impact you? Your dad, not being there, being the way he was. What did it create in you in terms of your perceptions of men? Our relationship with our dad definitely colors our sense of our relationship with our masculine and what we think men are and all that. So I was wondering how that affected you.
Well, I mean, I guess ultimately, I would say that early in my life, because very quickly afterwards, my father met my stepmother. So my stepmother's been a part of my life since I was, as far back as I can remember. My second memory in life is my stepmother walking across the parking lot when I was 4 years old in Dallas, Texas. One of the times my father flew us down to visit him. So I had sort of three parents in my life, and I would say that the parent I reached out for the most, the one I wanted to be connected to the most, because my mother was always there, right? She lived with us and whatever. She was kind of more focused on my older brother because he had emotional issues. I guess, because he was older, he remembered my parents being together. I literally don't remember. And so I see pictures of my parents together, and I'm like, it's completely foreign to me. I'm like, okay, I know they were together, but I don't remember them together. But he did, so I guess that messed him up a bit. But he was the parent that I most wanted to bond with. That I, if you said, okay, who would you really like to be with? Or, underneath it all, I would have said, my dad. I was always in some way, shape, or form kind of reaching for my father. And never feeling like, I was kind of feeling like this was what I was getting at the same time, macho men don't cling to each other or whatever. And I guess how it affected me was that I was looking for the definition of, I guess, what a man is. Since nobody would sit me down and, having the birds and the bees explained to you is not the same as having what, being a man is explained to you. And of course, my mother was, again, wonderfully intended, but very timid person. So I wasn't picking up any sort of masculine training from her. My uncle, again, had his own kids who were obviously always going to be, more important and perfect compared to my brother and I. So over time, I guess strength, power, force started becoming interesting to me. I remember seeing Conan the Barbarian, and Arnold Schwarzenegger swinging that sword around. I remember vividly the scene where he swings the sword around his body, and I was like, Christ, I want to do that. And I remember teaching myself that. I remember the day that I taught myself, I was like, ha ha ha, I'm Conan now.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, I would say, yeah, I became interested in, I remember having several years where I was interested in guns and swords. I became interested, and I think that led to like an interest in sort of sideways, like in Dungeons and Dragons, which has, I've been a fantasy, a fantasy fan ever since. But that, and of course, having my psychic thing is a whole other story, which kind of adds to it as well. But but that sort of, power. So it's like somebody like a Schwarzenegger, these guys, action heroes. I remember watching, like, when I was in early teens, when Miami Vice came on, like those guys, like, they were cool and whatever, but again, guns, cops. I remember watching, if you remember the show Airwolf, Jan Michael Vincent, and his big helicopter, which was again a military thing. So that kind of thing, I guess strong, guys who were either strong and powerful. He was actually kind of like a very inner person, more inwardly focused, but he was pulled into the fight. He didn't want to fight, but he had to fight kind of person. Introspective, that's what I'm talking about. But yeah, the warrior power, I guess, if you're going to sum it up into a word, the warrior power became very interesting to me and stayed with me ongoing. I mean, it eventually led to me in college finally I would mess around here and there and teach myself. I taught myself nunchucks. I taught myself some sword stuff. I never got a gun, but I got replicas. I taught myself how to strip them and clean them and whatever. But again, these are all replica guns. I never got a real one. And then eventually, in college, started studying boxing, and then into actual martial arts, or Eastern martial arts. And since then, I've studied 11 different systems. So it set that in there. But even that evolved, thankfully, away from external to internal. But yeah, I guess that search for for strength, because I guess that's, ultimately, I guess, because I was being pushed away by strong men searching for, I was searching for that myself. By the same token, later in life, and not at that point, but later in life, it led me for a number of years to gravitate toward strong-willed male types, sometimes who had my best interests at heart, and sometimes who had their best interests at heart, which is how I, a few business situations blew up in my face because I trusted more than I, actually knew. But again, we all learn through that. So that's, I guess, another aspect of it is finding people who have the energy that you perceive you want, and then gravitating towards it, and maybe blindly accepting simply because you believe, okay, if I'm accepted by the person who has the energy that I am consciously or unconsciously seeking, I there too will have that energy, bestowed upon me, etc., or that equals that I have. But again, I think that was an outgrowth years later, as a result of those earlier years.
Wow, that's great. That's yeah, you really walked us through it really well, like your journey with all this. So yeah, it's I don't really think about that, but like, yeah, like how, I mean, that's obvious that would affect us a lot too. Like, okay, you have this big, I'll just call it like a big hole in your life, right? When you don't have your dad, involved, and then you mentioned with your uncle and other things. So there's like this big hole, and then it starts getting filled in different ways, right? And like one of the ways you mentioned was, through TV, movies, things like that, connecting with these guys, right? Like,
Yeah.
hey, these guys are pretty cool. I'd like to be more like that.
Yes.
So, and whether someone's come from your background or just in general, guys, the influence that this isn't something we've talked about in the interviews yet is like the influence of the movies we haven't talked about too much. Like, here's what a guy's like. You see Rambo, or like
There you go.
this kind of stuff, shooting up everybody and killing people, and like, yeah, this is a real man right here, baby. Yeah. And the big muscles, all that kind of stuff that's got started in the 80s, 90s, especially, right? Be the tough guy. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's so interesting. I'm trying to think myself if there was any like I know those things have always appealed to me even to this day, right? Like we watch guys and women, but like watch these guys, superheroes or whatever, and something inside you, I think, says either I could be that, or I am that, or I connect with that, or that's cool, or whatever, right? Like they're doing, like, who knows, like they may not be doing that great of things in the movies, but we identify with a sense of that power, right? Like out of like being in that strength. And so I thought that was really great. They brought that up, and now they're starting to change it up, right? Okay, now the women need to get the leads more than men, or or at least as much as men, and and then we have to get everybody involved with it, right? So which is interesting. Like, now we got to share that around, and then I feel like more and more it's gonna be like, okay, we shared it around. Now, do we need, maybe now we did that. Now what's next, right? It's always like, what's next? Now what's next after that? But it's interesting. Now we're going to share that sense of masculine energy, or whatever you want to call it, around, and I think that's fascinating. And but yeah, I can't really remember other than like something. I do remember like Rocky, movies like that, like are very like, wow. But I remember like Gandhi, like was really big to me when I was going, that was in the 80s, that movie. I was just awed by Gandhi. I really was. Like most kids, I think at that age would be like, this is so boring. Like, right? I was the opposite. I was awed. I was just like, what an amazing man. I don't think I consciously, like you said, I didn't think like I want to be like him,
Right.
but I was just awed by him. I was just like, oh my God, what an amazing person, what an amazing man, and all this stuff. And but yeah, I saw all the violence and stuff. So I don't know what I thought of it, but I know I was inspired definitely by things like Rocky. What kid didn't like play that music in the background during a workout or something, right? Eye of the Tiger and all stuff.
If I get knocked down, all I do is spit and get back up, and yeah, like I'm gonna keep swinging.
Right, you can't stop me. My whole thing was it was like nobody knows who I really am. Like I look like a lamb to most guys, probably. Like, oh, you're not much. I'm like, yeah, all right, we'll see. Like, you have no clue, dude. Like, and like that's what would happen is like people would see not that I was bench pressing 400 or some crazy thing, but people would see me in the gym working out and they're like, dude, you're lifting that much. I'd never imagine or whatever. I'm like, a lot stronger than you guys think. And, so I always had I always felt like, which, yeah, probably at some level, I probably thought, what's wrong with me that I'm perceived as so weak in a way. And then as people would notice it, I was like, yeah, finally you get it, right? But I always knew it as a reflection of my own self. I just wasn't showing up in a way that was strong. I was very quiet to myself, of course. So I just came across the way I came across it. It's a nice, just gentle soul and all this stuff. And it always made me laugh because people didn't know the intensity that lived inside of me. So
Yeah, well, the 70s and 80s were definitely not the in crowd was still the thing. You know what I mean? There were you had the different cliques, right? But ultimately there was that perception, because especially when I ended up switching to high schools halfway through from New York City into New Jersey when I moved in with my father at 15 finally. But there's that perception of the in crowd. And it doesn't, as long as you're not in the in crowd, you want to be in the in crowd. You can say, well, you're part of the burnouts, or you're part of the dweebs, or you're part of the AV, or you're part of the band, or you're part of the, whatever the other things were. And then there's, I guess, folks like you and me, like I wasn't part of anything.
right, I was part of
I
the
wanted to be part of something so that I could eventually be part of the crowd. So I was like,
I didn't even belong to one of the groups. I just was the nobody crowd. And I happened to have a couple of decent friends that were more popular than me, but they're definitely fairly popular, not super popular, but one of them actually was pretty super popular. But I was just like a tag along friend.
Yeah, that was me too. It's like,
yeah.
by the grace of other people's social circles, I had a life in high school.
Right.
Certainly not by my own making.
Yeah.
But ultimately, and the thing is that at least into the 90s, coming out of college and whatever, there was still a lot of that. I would say you go into the corporate world and there was still that sort of, it was the cool people, there was the people who were brown nosing their way to the top. There were the cool people. Then there were, I guess like the hard workers that didn't really talk to anybody. They just wanted to do their work. And then there were the slackers and, all that kind of stuff.
All that stuff, the nerds and like
the nerds or whatever. You had, again, different cliques. Obviously,
right.
It was a football team in your company, but whatever it was, it's like, oh, okay, these are the cool people and such. Today, it's far more interesting that because of, and I think because of especially because of the gender things now with non-binary and all that stuff, and I admire it. I can't keep up with it, but I admire it. My wife and I are kind of dual opposites on that. She kind of wishes everybody was just accept that they're either male or female. But I'm like, no, you know, you got to be who you are. And my oldest daughter is very much a defender of everybody. Sometimes to an annoying extent. She just wants to have an argument about everybody for everybody's sake. I'm like, you don't even know these people. Why are we having an argument about them?
Right.
But it is amazing that I think now, like you said, the quiet person, the quiet man, the gentle soul, whatever you want to call it, the people who, you know, got put aside previously, they're almost like they're almost, I shouldn't even say almost, they kind of are the cool people now. You know, there's still like the in crowd or the sporty jockey, whatever's, you know, hot girl, cool guy kind of things, still fighting for, you know, we're the cool people. But there's so many not in the in crowd that have collectively come together. Kind of, you could call it the other 99% or whatever, have come together so much so that it's kind of like you have these, rather than superior, inferior, now you have like these dueling things, to the point where I think, you know, even the 99% is starting to kind of become more pervasive, in terms of power and influence and coolness. I mean, you have movies being written about them, you know, and series and whatever. So it's an interesting time, very, very different than when you and I grew up.
Right. Yeah, the movies would have been more about the popular kids and stuff like that.
Right.
Like,
Well, yeah, I mean, you had the come from behind stories, right? You had, I mean, if you remember that movie with Corey Haim, Lucas, where he and Charlie Sheen and what's her face, Green, who I went to the same high school with her, and Winona Ryder, you know, he was like a geeky little kid who somehow, I guess, wanted to be on the football team and couldn't make the football. He made the football team and then they tackled him and he got beat up or whatever the heck it was. But there was those kind of movies. But again, even if you look at that, look at the model was an inspiration. You were being inspired to, people who weren't built for certain things were being inspired to go do those things. I was like, oh, okay. You know, we're cheering on that this kid who is not built to be a warrior is trying to go be a warrior, instead of saying, well, you know, what is he amazing at and why don't we celebrate that? You know, no, we have to celebrate the story of him getting a varsity jacket for football even though he landed on his ass one time after being tackled.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, and you had to get into the in crowd, like you said earlier.
Right, now he's cool because he's technically a football player. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, you're right. I mean, things have changed quite a bit. Hear it every day, I feel like, from my kids, like you do, I'm sure. So you're getting intel on that kind of stuff. So yeah. So one of the things you mentioned was you got into the swords, then you got into martial arts. Yeah, I was like, that's cool. You're one of those people you know, especially a few years ago when I was really getting back into martial arts or looking at, you know, kind of studying with that stuff again. I was like, I would have been fascinated even more so back then. I'd be like, oh, what 11 systems? And hey, can you share with me about all that? Because I have a friend that's similar to you in that way. He has a lot of backgrounds, and so I learned from him, right? I was really good. I really got into it, and it was helpful in solidifying my sense of my masculinity in a way, you know, because usually it would go from like either just totally soft to like, okay, I'll crush everybody, you know, like these big polar opposites. So it definitely was part of my journey in my life of centering the energy more was in martial arts for me. What did martial arts do for you? Like, I'm curious because a lot of guys have, you know, utilize martial arts, I feel, in order to, you know, work with the yin and yang, whether they realize it or not. I feel like a lot of guys have been drawn into it for in that respect, not always, but sometimes, and wondering what did it, how it may have helped you and in that way and in other ways. Like, how did martial arts help you?
I guess in many ways, martial arts, you could say, saved my life and or made my life. So what happened was that I didn't, when I moved in with my father at 15, my father had promised me that when I moved in with him, he'd get me karate lessons because he had studied karate. I think he got to brown belt. And of course, when I moved in, my grades were, so he was like, well, get your grades better. So I got my grades better, and, he continued to make excuses for not getting me lessons. So I ended up going to college, never having studied formally, having again taught myself stuff and whatever. But then in college, I got my ass handed to me badly one night, and I wanted to start learning how to defend myself. So the next semester, I joined the boxing team, and I started learning how to box. And I was a member of that for several months. But every time we were sparring, I remember, I was okay. We had different weights, so I kept getting put up against like lighter, especially this one kid who was much smaller than me, lighter weight. He could hit me 5 times before my hand even left my face. Yeah. It was like, and I'd be trying like and just literally rounds like this, just hitting my gloves and smacking me in the face. And then like hitting me in the gut, and I go, oh, I was like, oh. And I kept thinking to myself, man, I want to kick this son of a bitch. I just want to kick him one time. And then I was like, you know what? I want to be able to use all my weapons. Here's these 2 weapons I can't use. And elbows and headbutts and everything else like that. Yeah. Grabbing and stuff. I'm like, if I could just grab him one time, I'd have. So I started studying with a friend of mine, Taijutsu, and studied, with him until graduated, later that year. And then I came back, but the thing was, obviously in college you drink a lot, so I was drinking a lot as well. And coming out of college, I was hanging out with my, friends from high school and whatever. And my heavy drinking, I think, had a lot to do with my issues with my father. I remember reading, happening across a letter one of my friends wrote to an ex-girlfriend where he was talking about me, talking constantly about my pop. And I was like, I didn't realize I talked about him that much. Apparently I do. And at some point, I used to get, you drink too much. When you drink too much and you have low self-esteem, and you're constantly talking crap about other people. And after being home after college for several months, one night, I guess I got incredibly drunk, said some really dumb stuff about one of my friends in front of whoever at a party, had a blowout with him, rather unpleasant in an unpleasant way, which I won't go into. But what came down to was that, there was like 6 of us. And the rest of the guys had to kind of choose between him and me. Without saying it, they chose him. Like my phone stopped ringing and whatever. So very quickly there I was, 22 years old, no friends to hang out with, nothing to do. And I was like, okay, what do you do with yourself when you're 22, single, wanting to find girls but have 0 friends to go out with? Well, nobody wants to be the lonely guy at the club. So I said, I have nothing to do during the weeknights, right? Because now I'm an adult, I don't have to stay home and study or anything. So I started studying martial arts. And eventually I ended up studying, I met my first really good friend, Dave. He and I studied Goju for a while, and then he had to move away for work for a year or 6 months or something. So I studied that for a while, and then I went and studied Kung Fu. I met my teacher. This is my teacher who ended up teaching me Long Fist, Kenpo, Kaju Kembo, Kali Eskrima, Estacada kickboxing, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and then some Baji and some other stuff. And there at that school, I made friends, and met my best friend Lenny, who I'm still, I met him at 26, half my life ago. We're still best friends now. But thanks to my friend Dave, I met other people, other friends who I'm still friends with, and so I created a new social network. By the same token, shortly after meeting my new friends, I started questioning whether or not I could go without drinking. Like, can I go this weekend without having beer? Or can I go this weekend and only have 2 beers, Friday night and Saturday night? And then can I go a weekend without drinking? And then that question became a 7.5-year dry spell without any alcohol. Now, when you go from once in, not once, regularly, probably once every other week, having blackout drunks, and always being out drinking every, during college courses and stuff, drinking, to not drinking at all. That's a good cleansing for the body. But all of that anger, all of that, what that was inside of me, because there was a lot of anger inside of me, that was no longer stated. So I think I worked a lot of that out physically through the martial arts, but also earning my belts and becoming a teacher and having people respect me, and having to kind of learn the difference between the respect that you earn versus having a title, being able to start feeling comfortable leading people and talking to people. There was a lot of, and it all came from martial arts, because I was an assistant, I was an assistant instructor and a student, and wanting to learn all these different things, etc. And I studied other things afterward, but eventually, I studied, what was it, Wing Chun and Xingyi after leaving my main teacher's teaching and studying with other people. It was kind of like, okay, even at that point, I discovered Bruce Lee, and Bruce Lee was all about, learn from new people, learn new things, etc. So after I realized I could kill a person 20 different ways, it was like belts became meaningless. It's like, okay, go study this other thing. Why? So I can learn this again. Okay, I was always adjusting. Once I discovered Bruce, I started adjusting even when I was learning.
Mhm.
And my teachers weren't always happy with that, that I would churn this into this, and like, well, yeah, but this feels better, and this flows, but then it was like, it doesn't have to be just about martial arts. So I was like, okay, well, what else can I expand? What can be the next dimension of this, or the next level of this? How do I up level myself without asking that question? It's like, what's next for me? So then I started studying, I was like, okay, well, the human mind, and then that's what led me into, studying Silva initially, and then eventually Neuro-Linguistic programming, and subconscious. And then with my body, going heavily into yoga for a number of years. And then meditation and all that. And so it became less about, being able to fight, just keeping my body healthy. And like, okay, well, developing myself as a person, my mind, and then eventually, into the spirit and whatever. So I always look at it kind of like the development, the same way I think it was Wayne Dyer who laid out the 4 levels of a person, which was, okay, enough. My phone keeps ringing at me. Like, you start out as, I think he said it was the athlete, and then the warrior, and then the statesman, and then the spirit. And I discovered Wayne when I was about 30 years old. So that also had a huge impact on my life too. That was transitional, because I was coming out of the martial arts at that point, really seriously. Okay, that's enough for you. I'm just going to silence this now. Thank you. And if I look back at that, it's kind of like that was what it was. When I got into high school, normal high school, etc., I eventually started becoming more athletic. And that led into the warrior phase. And then, in my 30s, switching over and learning about Wayne Dyer, spirituality and personal development, that's when I started moving into, the statesman kind of thing. And I think now I'm kind of starting to move from statesman into the spirit piece, especially with the work that I do now, and the quantum and everything. I'm not sure what that's apropos of, but there you go.
You're sharing your past.
My phone just went off. I don't know how that connects, but it's some way, shape, or form it does.
Of course, yeah. So you're saying like the path that you were on. I mean, that martial arts was like, it's kind of like the savior in a way, like it was your right tonic or whatever you want to call it, but like the right path for you at that time.
Right.
It makes sense, given the interest you had growing up, and it was a healthy, good focus to get into. And isn't it interesting again, like it's like this idea, everything's gone, everything's lost. Well, I guess I could do martial arts. All right. And then that brought you all this growth and fulfillment and all that good stuff, and helped you to, stop drinking, and oh my God, just to build your self-esteem, and just totally did so much for you. And I think that's so amazing. And yeah, I mean, we all, for me, a lot of times I feel like when I got into metaphysics with science of mind, that was kind of sort of, I mean, it was down the line, but like, it was kind of like one of the things that really propelled me. Is like, okay, I can start commanding my life. I can have what I want, that kind of that sense of power, right? So like, yeah, it's very, very important. So, but yeah, I think like you found your own, what I'm hearing and interpreting in this short conversation we're having today is that you were able to find your own sense of yourself, and then therefore of what we might describe as a feminine, masculine energy within this entire path you just described. It's like it helped you to find it and then mature in it. So yeah, I think that's really awesome. Really, really awesome. Yeah, it's funny. There's so many different schools of martial arts. There's thousands, I think. I'm like, yeah, I think like I've studied in maybe 5 or 6 or something like that, and not that much, just a little tiny bit in each one. Taekwondo the most, I guess, actually. But it's funny, I had the same experience with Taekwondo. I'm like, this is so much BS. If it was an actual fight, we wouldn't be fighting like this. This is so stupid. Like, that's what I thought when I was in Taekwondo. I'm like, I'd whoop your butt if I could just do it my own way. Like, that was my attitude anyway. Who knows? But that was my attitude. And I remember like some guy was like 50 pounds heavier than me fighting against me. And he just like knocked me to the floor in a tournament. I almost like knocked me out. And I was just like, but I was determined. I was like, I'm going to knock you backwards by pounding you in your midsection, like a stupid idea, and it didn't work. But I was trying to prove something, right? I'm so badass. I'll knock you right off your feet with a punch. Not quite that good there, Daniel. But yeah, just really just trying to find my way. I know I did do that with the martial arts too. Like, it was definitely a component as well. So yeah, all these different pieces we put together to kind of find that. And now you're doing this work to help people with the be-do scale or all that, both. And that's amazing. So I got one last question as we're starting to wrap things up a little bit today is, so what do you do? What do you feel like you're doing right now that continues to help you to maybe deepen in your connection with source and the masculine, and, the sense of balance maybe between the feminine and masculine? Like, what helps you today?
Well, I mean, I meditate every day. I just start the day. I do a couple of different forms of meditation. I've studied multiple things. So my twice a day, I do transcendental meditation. But when you've learned a lot of meditation, you start learning that, because a lot of my work is helping people to meditate, but in different ways. So utilizing what I call field work, which is my particular skill, is teaching people how to go into the quantum and build from there, build things, ideas, plans, skills, outcomes, etc. So I think that helps to keep me balanced and expanding. in terms of the masculine feminine, I think, oh, let me rephrase that because I don't like to use the brain. I feel that when you get to a certain level, you stop feeling about it being a man or a woman thing, or a male or a female thing, and you really just feel as a beingness thing. Because even though yin and yang are made up of two parts, they're still one. And I feel that ultimately that, you know, what do we always talk about is oneness. You know, if you really go to the highest level, there's only one. There's only one thing. And so it is this illusion of separation that makes us chase. You know, I don't feel balanced on this side, or I don't feel balanced on that side. However, if we give up chasing the opposite, or even, you know, the opposite to get it, or the same to be it, and we just say, I'm going to allow the fullness of oneness, sort of the pain, the need for, the pain of not being feminine enough, or masculine enough, or whatever, kind of goes away. Because if you're one full enough, you kind of rise above that. Like, you know, I mean, I still love to watch action, you know, like I said, I love fantasy stuff, so I watch fantasy and sci-fi. I'll watch fight scenes, and I'll like, my little muscle fibers start twitching off again.
Right.
You know, and whatever. And yet, you know, if you said to me, hey, you know, you want to go scrap with somebody, like, I don't know. Because I know what the hell it feels like to get your face punched in. Yeah, but also, I know that it you know, being to anything doesn't solve anything. And really, if the purpose of life is happiness, because I subscribe to Abraham Hicks, who says, you know, at the end of the day, everything you want, be it a person or an object or an amount of money or a job or whatever, you want it because you believe in the having of it. This is wonderful. I'm saying you want it only because you believe in the having of it. You will be happy. So Abraham says, if you do nothing else but just focus on being happy, everything else that you desire will fall into place.
Right.
And we get so distracted with this car that appeals to the masculine, and this vacation that appeals to the feminine, and, you know, still playing on the genders and the base desires of the physical bodies of the genders. And yet, if we can see past that to happiness, then it unfolds in a lot of times in a very surprising way, in a serendipitous way, which is what I love to help my clients create, is serendipity. And most people don't even understand really what that is. You're really just allowing the goodness of the universe to come to you. Because ultimately you say, you know, I want to balance my masculine and my feminine, whatever. Really, you just want to be happy. You know, whatever it is that we think we're chasing or trying to create or trying to balance, trying to, like, if you just be happy.
Right. Well, I mean,
all that stuff.
I mean, isn't it true though that, yeah, the if you start getting too caught up in those ideas, like, yeah, okay, I'm being masculine enough, I'm being feminine enough, yeah, you'll always feel like something's out of balance, right? I need to balance my work life with my family life with this, and okay, but how's that going? What's going to evaluate that? Your brain, which isn't it sees nothing but fragmentation ultimately, right? So, you know, yeah, so yeah, definitely coming from the oneness vibe, and yet there is the twitching of those muscles when we watch certain movies, right? And yet there is this, like, oh, that was so sweet when we look at the sunrise, or, you know, or look at a baby or something, like, you know, like, there's still these different qualities going on. But I know what you're saying, like, we've got to I love that what really helps you, or one of the things you're really helping to share with everybody, is like, you got to focus on the oneness. That's the thing. Focusing in on the oneness, the presence within, and allowing that to just sort itself out by being with the one thing, so to speak, right? So that's what I'm hearing from you, right?
That's ultimately what we want. I mean, we are in physical form to have physical experiences. There's no point in coming here to say, I want to go right back to being, like, there's no point in coming here.
Yeah.
So you're going to have masculine experiences and feminine experiences and whatever. But you've seen, I'm sure you've seen people who have gone too far to the masculine, both men and women, and people who have gone too far to the feminine, both men and women. Neither extreme is useful. It always ends up being that when you balance the two, you have the most harmonious life, and things seem to work out the best for you. The people who struggle tend to be the people who want to really pull to one side or the other. You see that in anything. You see that in politics. You see that in religion. You see that in anything. Even in family dynamics. The person who always takes this person's side. Well, and that's always going to be that team, and this person, and then there's Uncle Charlie, who just kind of always sees everybody's side, right? And everybody likes Uncle Charlie. Uncle Charlie always seems to be in a good mood, even when everybody else is fighting. Charlie's like, I'll have this turkey leg while nobody's paying attention. So that's the thing, is that it's like, okay, when we look at what we're trying to balance, why are we trying to balance it? And if we say, okay, well, really, if I can get down to it, it's because I believe that I'll be happier when I'm balanced and blah, blah, blah. Well, then just forget about the balancing thing right now. I mean, keep it in the back of your mind, but really focus on just being happy. And what happens is Source will unfold things for you perfectly in a way that keeps you in that balance.
Right.
If you focus on happiness, you're automatically balanced. But if you feel that you have to get balanced to be happy, then you're always outside of balance,
right,
trying to get to happy. But if you say, I'm just going to hopscotch over when nobody's looking into happiness.
It's not static. The brain thinks around getting some static state achieved, right? And things are fluid. It's just a constant movement of energy, and so
masculine to feminine to masculine. That's the yin and the yang. So you're gonna have physical experiences, but if you remember, I'm having these physical experiences because I'm a non-physical being having these physical experiences, and that keeps it in perspective. It's when you believe you're a physical being only, that's when all of a sudden it gets all messed up.
Right. Totally. Well, this is really a delightful time together with you. I really appreciate everything you shared, your journey and the wisdom you shared and everything. So I just want to thank you a lot. Sure. I really feel like a brotherhood with you in terms of like some of the things you shared too. So I appreciate that as well. So thank you so much for the conversation today.
Sure, man. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening in to Just Two Conscious Guys Talking, where our mission is to impact millions of men ultimately to deepen their awakening by examining their consciousness of what's been unfolding for them with male stereotypes and programming that has allowed them to have opportunities to evolve during these times. It's an exciting time to bring more love to men and women around the world, and we are grateful for you tuning in today. Feel free to share this episode and keep tuning in, and also look in the show notes for a link to get notifications of future episodes. Until the next time, everyone, goodbye for now.